was 39 years old, and he measured his life in weight and time. At his job, he moved 40-pound boxes of consumer electronics from pallets to trucks, 8 hours a night, 5 nights a week. The pace was grueling, a relentless rhythm of lift, turn, place, repeat. It earned him $58,000 a year before taxes, a solid wage for a man without a college degree in Charlotte, North Carolina. But the real currency he dealt in was exhaustion. It was a bone-deep weariness that settled into his muscles and clouded his thoughts, a permanent fog he had lived in for 5 years. He worked the graveyard shift, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., a schedule that inverted his world and kept him in a state of perpetual jet lag. He did it for one reason: his wife, Bria. When they married, Bria had come with a constellation of debts from what she called her youthful mistakes. There was a defaulted student loan from a community college program she never finished, amounting to $18,000. There were 3 maxed-out credit cards with interest rates that hovered around 24%, adding another $32,000 to the total. And a personal loan from a high-interest lender for a car she had long since sold, which stood at $23,000. The grand total was a staggering $73,000, a mountain of financial ruin that threatened to swallow their future before it even began. Marcus, a simple man whose father had taught him that a man's duty was to provide and protect, saw the debt not as her problem, but as theirs. "We'll tackle it together," he had said, his voice full of a determined love that felt as solid as the concrete floor of his warehouse. He had laid out a plan. He would take the punishing overnight shift because it came with a 15% pay differential. They would live on his base salary, and every extra dollar, from the night differential, from overtime, from his small annual bonus, would be a missile aimed directly at the heart of that $73,000 monster. For 5 years, he had held to that promise. He sacrificed sleep, holidays, and the simple pleasure of watching the sunset with his wife. He did it all because he believed he was building them a foundation, a debt-free life where they could finally start living. He had no idea he was building on sand, and the tide was already coming in. Have you ever sacrificed everything for someone you love, only to find out they were playing a completely different game? So many of us pour our hearts into building a future, but it's a devastating blow when you realize you were the only one holding a hammer. Let us know in the comments if you've ever felt that kind of one-sided effort, and stick with us to see how Marcus takes back his power. Their life together was a carefully constructed facade of domestic normalcy, built on Marcus's sweat and Bria's acceptance of his sacrifice. They lived in a modest duplex on the west side of Charlotte, a neighborhood of hard-working families and small, tidy lawns. The rent was $1,200 a month, a figure Marcus was proud to have negotiated down from $1,250. He drove a 2014 Honda Civic with 140,000 miles on it, a car he maintained himself, changing the oil every 5,000 miles in the narrow driveway. His watch was an $89 Timex, its face scratched from accidental brushes with container walls. A typical weekday began for Marcus when it ended for most of the world. At 7 a.m., he would guide his Civic into their driveway. The engine's quiet hum the only sound on the sleeping street. He'd let himself into the duplex, moving with the practiced quiet of a man who lived opposite the sun. The air inside would be still and warm. Bria would be asleep in their bedroom, a queen-sized bed with a $400 mattress he'd bought on a holiday sale 3 years prior. He wouldn't disturb her. Instead, he'd go to the kitchen, a small space with laminate countertops and aging appliances. He'd put on a pot of coffee, a generic $8 brand from Food Lion, setting the timer so it would be fresh for Bria when she woke up around 9 a.m. While the coffee brewed, he would often sit at their small, $150 kitchen table and look at the numbers. He had a dedicated notebook where he tracked their progress. Each month, he sent an extra $1,216.67 toward the debt. It was a precise, unyielding payment. He could tell you the exact date each of the 3 credit cards had been paid off. He could tell you the remaining balance on the student loan down to the cent. $4,321.15. They were so close. In less than 4 months, it would all be gone. The thought was the only thing that could cut through his exhaustion. He would imagine the day he could quit the night shift. The day they could finally start a real savings account. Maybe even for a down payment on a house of their own. Bria's life ran on a different clock and a different budget. She worked part-time as the salon manager for her older sister Tanya. The salon, Gloss and Hue, was in the heart of South Park, one of Charlotte's most affluent neighborhoods. It was a world of glass, chrome, and hushed, wealthy chatter. While Marcus was wrestling with pallets under the harsh fluorescent lights of a warehouse, Bria was scheduling appointments for $500 balayage treatments and selling $90 bottles of imported shampoo. Her proximity to wealth shaped her desires. She saw no contradiction in letting Marcus live like a monk while she enjoyed the finer things. Her hair was always perfectly styled, a benefit of working at the salon, but a service that would cost a regular client $400 every 8 weeks. Her closet was filled with clothes that dwarfed Marcus's simple work pants and t-shirts. He once saw a receipt for a pair of jeans she'd bought for $180. He didn't say anything. He told himself she deserved to feel good. He was handling the hard part. She was supposed to be the reason for it all. He'd cook their dinners to save money, stretching a $20 grocery run into 3 meals. He'd make big pots of chili or spaghetti. Simple, hearty food. Bria would sometimes pick at it, scrolling through her phone, looking at pictures from her friends' vacations. "Mandy is in Cabo again," she'd say, a wistful tone in her voice. "It looks amazing." Marcus would nod, too tired to register the subtle complaint. "Soon, baby," he'd say, his voice raspy with fatigue. "Once we're clear of this debt, we can go anywhere you want." She would smile, a quick, fleeting expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know, Marcus. You're doing so great." The praise was just enough to fuel him for another night, another shift, another payment. He was a machine, built for her comfort, and he was running perfectly. He had no idea the machine was about to break down. The outrage didn't accumulate in a single explosive moment. It was a slow build, a series of small, cutting remarks and dismissive gestures that, in hindsight, formed a damning pattern. Marcus, blinded by love and exhaustion, had explained them all away. He was too tired, she was stressed, they were both making sacrifices. But the signs were there, growing more obvious with each passing month. The first significant crack in the facade appeared during a discussion about a vacation. The final debt payment was on the horizon, just 6 months away. Marcus, feeling a surge of optimism, wanted to plan a celebration. He sat down with Bria at their kitchen table, his debt-tracking notebook open beside him. "I was thinking," he began, a rare, genuine smile on his face. "For our first trip, we could do something simple. Rent a cabin up in the Blue Ridge Mountains for a weekend. It's only about $300 for a nice place. We could hike, relax by a fire. Just us." Bria, who had been painting her nails a shade of glossy crimson that cost $15 a bottle, didn't look up. "A cabin? Marcus, that's not a vacation. That's just being in a different, smaller house with more bugs." She blew on her nails gently. "Tanya and her husband are looking at a 7-day Caribbean cruise. It's all inclusive. Food, drinks, everything. I saw a deal for $3,500. The number landed like a stone in Marcus's stomach. $3,500? Bria, that's almost 3 months of debt payments. The whole point is to be free of that, not to dive right back in." She finally looked at him, her expression a mixture of pity and annoyance. Don't you want nice things, Marcus? We've been living like college students for 5 years. I want to feel a little luxury. I want to post pictures that don't look like they were taken in our backyard." The mention of pictures stung. It wasn't about the experience. It was about the appearance of it. "A cabin is what people do when they can't afford a real vacation," she finished, turning her attention back to her nails. The conversation was over. Marcus closed his notebook. The smile was gone. A few weeks later, they were at a summer barbecue at his friend David's house. David and his wife, both teachers, had just bought a small starter home. Everyone was in a celebratory mood. While gathered around the grill, David clapped Marcus on the back. "So, man, I hear you're about to slay that debt dragon. What's the first thing you're going to do when you're free?" Marcus felt a flush of pride. "Quit the night shift," he said immediately. "And then, maybe start saving for a place like this." From across the patio, Bria let out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't a happy sound. It was dismissive. "Oh, Marcus and his plans," she said to the woman next to her, loud enough for everyone to hear. "He's got notebooks full of them." She then deftly changed the subject, asking David's wife about the new curtains in her living room. The group's attention shifted. Marcus was left standing by the grill, feeling suddenly foolish. His moment of pride deflated like a cheap balloon. He felt his face grow hot. He had been made to look like a dreamer, a boy with his crayon drawings, not a man who had sacrificed half a decade of his life for a shared goal. The most frequent source of this subtle humiliation was Bria's sister, Tanya. Tanya was Bria's idol and her enabler. She was sharp, successful, and radiated an aura of casual wealth that made Marcus feel clumsy and poor. She owned the South Park Salon, a business valued at over $3 million, and lived in a sprawling home in Ballantyne. When she visited their modest duplex, she would park her white BMW 3 Series, a $60,000 car, in the street. As if she were afraid the driveway might scratch it, Tanya never spoke to Marcus directly with disrespect. It was always through Bria, a coded language of condescension. One Saturday afternoon, she was over for coffee. Marcus had just woken up, his body still aching from the previous night's shift. He came into the living room wearing his simple gray sweatpants and a faded t-shirt. Tanya, dressed in a $450 silk blouse and designer jeans, looked him up and down. Her eyes lingered for a moment on his worn-out $40 slippers. She didn't say a word to him. She turned to Bria and said, "You know, we're hiring for a new janitorial service at the salon. They get full benefits." The implication was clear, hanging in the air between them. Her brother-in-law, in her eyes, was no different from the people who cleaned the floor she walked on. Bria, instead of defending him, just gave a tight little smile. "Oh, Tanya, stop." It was a token protest, devoid of any real force. Later that week, Marcus came home from his shift with a printout from the loan servicer. He was ecstatic. The final payment was scheduled. In 2 months, they would be free. He found Bria in the living room, watching a reality show on their modest $300 television. "Look," he said, holding out the paper. "This is it, the finish line." She took the paper from him, glanced at it for less than a second, and set it down on the coffee table. "That's great, baby." Her eyes were already back on the screen, where women in sequined dresses were arguing on a yacht. "Hey, have you seen the new iPhone 14 Pro Max? The camera is supposed to be incredible." The phone cost $1,200. It was more than an entire month's debt payment. He stood there in the quiet of the living room, the sounds of manufactured drama from the TV filling the space between them. He looked at the paper on the table, the symbol of 5 years of his life, already forgotten. He looked at his wife, who was more interested in a gadget than their shared freedom. For the first time, a cold, hard thought entered his mind, a thought he immediately tried to push away. She doesn't care. He was so close to the truth. He just had no idea how ugly it really was. What he didn't know was that while he was erasing their past debt, she was busy creating a new one, hidden just out of sight. They had no idea what was coming. The night the world ended and began anew was Tuesday, October 18th. Rain was falling over Charlotte, a cold, persistent drizzle that slicked the roads and blurred the streetlights into watercolor streaks. Marcus was 3 hours into his shift at the freight depot, moving a shipment of flat-screen televisions. A familiar ache in his lower back had sharpened to a piercing throb. But that wasn't what concerned him. A wave of nausea had washed over him an hour earlier, followed by a clammy sweat that had nothing to do with physical exertion. Now, a fever was prickling at his skin, and each lift sent a jarring shudder through his body. At 3:47 a.m., his supervisor, a burly man named Frank, saw him pause and lean against a stack of pallets, his face pale under the warehouse's sodium lamps. "Williams, you look like death warmed over," Frank said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Go home. I'm not having you pass out and drop a $2,000 TV." Marcus started to protest out of habit, but another wave of dizziness convinced him. "Yeah, okay, Frank, thanks." He clocked out and walked slowly to his Honda Civic. The drive home was a blur. He kept the radio off, the rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers the only sound. He was focused on one thing, getting into bed. The spare room bed, specifically. He didn't want to risk waking Bria or getting her sick. He pulled into their driveway at 4:12 a.m. The house was dark, as he expected. He unlocked the front door with practiced silence, the click of the deadbolt seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet neighborhood. He slipped off his wet work boots on the mat, his socks soaking up the small puddle that formed around them. He winced as he straightened up, his back protesting. All he wanted was the oblivion of sleep. As he moved through the small living room, he heard it. A low murmur of voices from the kitchen. His first thought was that Bria had left the television on, but as he got closer, he could distinguish the words, the cadence. It was Bria and someone else. He froze, his hand hovering over the doorway to the hall. The other voice was familiar, laced with the same sharp, dismissive tone he had come to dread. It was Tanya. What was her sister doing here at 4 a.m? A knot of unease tightened in his gut. He crept closer, staying in the shadows of the hallway, his heart starting to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. The kitchen light was on, casting a yellow trapezoid onto the living room floor. He could hear them clearly now. "I just can't believe he's kept it up for this long," Bria was saying. There was a light, tinkling sound. Ice cubes in a glass. She was drinking. Tanya let out a low, throaty laugh. "I told you from the beginning. B. Men like him are simple. Give them a project, a duty, and they'll work themselves into the ground and call it love." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. He leaned his shoulder against the cool drywall of the hallway, steadying himself. "He came home with the final payment schedule last week," Bria said, and her voice was laced with an amusement that felt like a physical blow. "He looked like a little boy who'd won a spelling bee. It was almost pathetic." "Almost? It was completely pathetic," Tanya corrected. "All that sacrifice, just to pay off your old shopping sprees. Meanwhile, you've got a whole new set of toys he doesn't even know about. What are you up to now, 3 new cards?" Marcus's breath caught in his throat. "New cards?" "3, Bria confirmed. She giggled. A sound he used to think was beautiful. Now it sounded grotesque. 1 from Nordstrom, 1 from Visa, and an Amex. Just for emergencies, you know. An emergency being that cute little Chanel bag we saw at South Park Mall, Tanya said, her voice dripping with shared conspiracy. He's so focused on that one big number in his little notebook, he doesn't even think to look anywhere else. It's perfect. Then came the line that shattered everything, the line that would echo in his mind for months. Bria sighed, a theatrical, self-satisfied sound. I know. Sometimes I almost feel bad. But then I think, he's happy being my workhorse. He'll never leave. He's too tired to think. The words struck Marcus with the force of a physical impact. He's too tired to think. She wasn't just taking his money. She was mocking his exhaustion. She was weaponizing the very sacrifice he was making for her. The love he thought he was demonstrating was, in her eyes, a symptom of his weakness, his stupidity. The entire foundation of their 5-year marriage, his sacrifice, their shared goal, his unwavering love, was a joke they shared in the pre-dawn hours over a glass of something expensive. He felt a surge of bile rise in his throat and swallowed it down, the acidic taste burning. He stood there in the dark, a ghost in his own home. Listening to the two women he despised most in the world laugh at his expense, he didn't feel anger, not yet. That would come later. In that moment, all he felt was a profound, hollow coldness. The fever he thought he had was gone.